Hi, my name is Chobion, and I'm your teacher.
And my name is Martin, and I'm your student.
You're listening to Hidden by Design, a podcast about design for ordinary people, I guess.
Are you calling me ordinary?
For everyone. A podcast about design for everyone. We believe that the most pleasurable and best design is the design you don't see. That's why it's called Hidden by Design. And the kind of design that works without you noticing. Typically, if you notice that you don't notice the design, that's when you will notice that it's just a nice experience. Everything we say in the show is our own opinion and interpretation of current knowledge and how the trends are and what's happening. And it's what we understand now. We might be right, we might be wrong, but it doesn't really matter. If you think we're wrong and you want to challenge what we're talking about or what we're saying or what I'm teaching, then just write us. Because we hope to become better designers and smarter people and to use this in our everyday life. Thank you for listening. Today we're going to talk about flow, which is one of these things that when you approach this theme, it comes off as self-help books, right? How to obtain happiness. It's something that as a designer at first look, you wouldn't think that this is important. But I'm going to start out with the quote of the day. And the quote of the day is from a Danish guy called Søren Kirkegård.
First question, could you repeat the name?
Søren Kirkegård.
That's beautiful. I love that.
But I guess the English way of saying it is Søren Kirkegård.
Yeah, I think so.
But the quote is from Søren Kirkegård because he said something interesting about life. And I think that kind of sets the tone and the scene for what flow is all about. And he said, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. I'm not going to start analyzing it. It takes a lot, right? So, but just to give you an overview of what we're going to go through today, my eager student, we're going to start out with just defining what flow is. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what flow feels like. And then we're going to talk about the effects of flow. And then in the end, we're going to get some tips and tricks on how to create flow. Not only for the people we are designing for, but also for ourselves. Because flow is something nice, right? We start with what is flow. And as you can see on my slide here, it says drink. So that's what I just did.
I can't edit that bit out now.
No.
I'll leave it in that one.
It's just water.
So you say.
Exactly. It's very early. All right. So back to the topic. Flow is really a question of happiness, and it's not really a new term. Like the term flow is new, but the idea is old. As you know, Søren Kirkegård is kind of talking about it. Aristotle, all of these very, very old psychologists are talking about it. And it grounds, it's like the thought is that when we talk about happiness and being a happy individual, it's a well-known idea that you can't buy happiness, that happiness comes from within. It's your perspective of the world. It's how you perceive the world and not the riches that you surround yourself with. So you can be, it's the idea that no matter how poor or rich you are, it doesn't really affect how happy you are, because it's your perception of life. This is one of the most difficult things about flow, is to say this man's name.
Don't make me do it.
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I think. And he wrote, he did a lot of research. He's a psychologist and he did a lot of research in this topic. He has a lot of different other researches that he's done about creative psych, but all of them are kind of abstract. And so he wrote a book called The Psychology of Optimal Experience, which I believe every designer should read, especially game designers. Designers, very important topic. Game designers, fundamental thing to understand flow. Very, very important. And, it's the idea that intrinsic motivation is more important than extrinsic motivation, right? So, happiness comes from within, but also your drive to do things or complete things or experience things have to come from within in order for you to feel happy. And so when we create design where you're supposed to feel happy, the understanding of flow is very, very important. And that you are motivated from within instead of us trying. So we talked about this a little bit in the previous episodes, the difference between, motivation from within and then stick and stone, carrot kind of reward, punishment, and how these things work, right? So there's some deeper knots. Like, we didn't go into detail before. We are not going to go into detail today, but just to say that with flow, it has to come from within. You can't kind of force people to feel or experience flow by saying, here's a carrot, or you can motivate them to do that. So what does flow feel like? I believe that's essential to understanding why it's important to understand. So, this activity where you get so involved in a task or an activity where everything else stops existing, like time doesn't work anymore. You're just in the zone, right? It has a lot of different words, but it just means that you're so involved in what you're doing that you don't think about yourself anymore. Your ego no longer exists. So you're just there with the activity alone. And that's all you're focusing on. So an example of this could be when you play music, right? When you're playing music, you don't think about playing music, you just play music. And you're in that experience of playing music.
I was thinking of music as well, but it led me to the question of how long can flow last? Is it dependent on, because I was thinking about when I was in bands, the whole thing, I was so focused on being in a band, trying to make it as a musician, as a profession. I would go home and have dinner and watch telly and go to work and things like that. So the flow is the activity at the time of doing it rather than a whole attempted career.
Exactly. But just like, I know what you're talking about because I feel that as well. Like, everything just kind of becomes a blur because you can get so obsessed with this feeling. I see this with, people who are interested in football, right? All they think, dream, eat, drink. All they do is talk about football all the time. And for American listeners, that's soccer. But we don't use that word here in Europe. But it's the same with, a lot of others. Like, I have this thing about design. I think all the time about design. And so there's a blurred line. But flow is the activity itself. It's like what you experience when that moment where time just no longer exists. And it becomes this effortless effort, right? You do something, but you don't really feel that you have to, make an effort to do it. It actually just happens, right? And you always know what to do. It's not like you never stop to think, what do I do now? It's always, you just do things. You use your intuition. When we talk about the brain, it's the automatic part of the brain just kicks in and do almost all of the work. And it just feels great. It feels great afterwards because in the situation itself, like, it also feels great, but you don't pay attention to that feeling.
I was going to say, so when you're in flow, the moment you think about it, you must come out of the flow because you're thinking about something else.
Yeah, exactly. And so the moment you get out, and that's why Søren Kirkegård's quote is relevant here, right? Is that you understand the life back. It's like you understand that this was great, but in order to actually live your life, you have to obtain this great feeling. Why is this important to understand as a designer or as a human being, right? So because we want our audience or our users to get into flow, that's a good. And as a designer, that's great. As a game designer, it's essential. It's like, this is what games are. It's people being in flow. When you play a video game, you're in flow, if it's a good video game. And so if you can't put your user into that flow, then it's not the best video game. That brings us to the effects of flow. I don't know if you heard about this learning games or teaching games or within the area of school. Here in Denmark, at least, there's a lot of focus on games being part of the education. And flow is the reason. Because one of the effects of flow is that you have maximum learning. The moment you're in flow, everything you experience, everything you see, you remember it gets like transferred to the automatic part, the learning automatic part of the brain immediately. It just sticks, right? So if you can get people in flow, what they experience or what they see just sticks. It's a maximum, it's like that's where you learn the most. It also means that you have a very high productivity. So for companies, or is it because you're just working, you're not thinking, you're working. It's just like, it's intuitive. Everything you do when you're in flow is intuitive. And every challenges you do, you learn from them at maximum capacity. Your mind doesn't wander because you're focused on the task. So all of these daydreaming, kind of going, around not being focused on the task, it just disappears. And in the end, it just makes you happy. Those are the effects of flow. And this is why it's important as an individual to understand it, but also as a designer to understand why this is. Because when we design product, we do it to, increase productivity normally.
I speak to a lot of people who say that they have trouble focusing and they will procrastinate on tasks, or if they're in the middle of a task, they will check their emails, they will check their phone. So they obviously could very well do with listening to this episode.
Yes, I do believe. So, but reading about flow in general, because there's a lot of self-help kind of material on this, because it's based on science, it's based on research, and some very solid research as well. But it is a very abstract question, right? What is flow and how do you get into it? But there's some tips and tricks, and this is mainly what a designer do, is trying to get people to do things, right? We try to predict the future, and we try to get people into the state of just experiencing. This is what hidden by design means in some sense, right? The moment that you stop experiencing the design or stop seeing the design is when you're in flow. Like, this is when you get into that moment of flow. So that leads us on to the last part of this episode, which is how to create flow. There's 5 prerequisites for flow, which is commonly known. And I'm going to talk about one of them a little bit longer than the other ones. But there's 5 things that needs to be in place in an activity for you to have, the optimal possibility of getting into flow. And so it have to be intrinsically rewarding. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. It have to be something you feel from within. It have to be something you want to do. Otherwise, it's really, really difficult. All of these activities generally have to have a clear goal and a sense of progress. So that means that you cannot, it's like if you design something, you always have to keep in mind that the user or the one you design for have to understand exactly what to do at all time intuitively. From the automatic part of the brain, have to understand what to do next. And then we have to have point 3 is clear and immediate feedback. I need to have, in all of my designs or all of my activities, I have to understand immediately the effect of my actions. So when I do something, I need to see that effect immediately. So for example, if I'm programming and I'm typing down stuff, I need to see immediately the effects of what I'm doing. I have to be able to, compile and run this code and then see that it's running as I want to. In a drawing, I see the effects. With music, I hear the effect immediately. There's an immediate feedback. And then there's the one that specifically for game design is very important, and that's the matching the challenge and the skill. So if an activity is too difficult, meaning if we go back to the brain part, that I have to use my reflective part of the brain too much and really think about it and being challenged harder. It can also be physical challenge, right? So I think Csikszentmihalyi in his book uses tennis as an example. So if you play tennis against someone that's much better than you get into the state of anxiety. He calls it anxiety, but it means like the activity is no longer fun because someone is way better than you are. If you are way better than your opponent, then it's boring because there is no challenge. So you have to be in that zone of challenge meeting your skill, so that it's just challenging enough for you to have the like. And you know this, if you play a game against someone, and you just, it's like playing Tekken or some fighting game or chess or whatever activity you actually do where it's competitive. If the one you compete against is the same skill as you and it's a tug of war, who's going to win it? It's way more. It's like soccer is the same, football is the same. All sports, the matches that are most exciting to watch are the ones where you don't know the end result before the end whistle blows, right? It's the one where things feel touch and go all the time, right? And then there's number 5, which is possibly one of the biggest reasons within, corporate, is that you have to have an intense focus on the present. You can't be thinking about all other things and be disturbed by children or your phone or your email or notifications and all these kind of stuff. There's some research that says that if you get out of flow, it's like if you're in an activity and you're in that zone where you just start to be productive, it takes like 15 to 20 minutes or something like that to get back into that zone where you're producing. And so this thing about coworkers coming to you asking things all the time, your children asking for something while you're working, or any disruption from the outside world that kind of shakes you out of that state you're in, it just takes a while to get back into that. The power of flow is so strong that you will forget about Maslow's pyramid of needs. You no longer need to eat. You no longer need to sleep. It's like all of these needs just disappears when you're in the state. Sometimes you'll be sitting in an activity. I do this quite often if I'm allowed to. I will sit for a whole day and I'll just forget to eat. And then it becomes evening and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I kind of forgot to eat.
I've done that where I've worked through lunchtimes and it's come to 3 o'clock in the afternoon and thought, oh, I haven't had anything yet. But yeah, I don't think I've done it for a whole day.
I used to do that a lot.
I think we might have answered this with the talking about music, but can you be in flow with someone else?
Typically, you're in flow with yourself. But if you're doing music together, that's a couple like, so yes, that's a really good question, actually. I don't know.
But I guess you're still in flow yourself, but
yeah.
Maybe everyone is in their own sort of state of flow.
Our own bubble together.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing against something, that other person should also be in flow, right? When you're playing in a band, everyone is just hyper-focused on this. And I guess that's a really good question. I never thought about that, actually.
I'm getting good at this.
You are you are in flow with yourself, and you can be on an activity that multiple people work on. That is a really, really good question. It spawns a lot of thoughts in my head about, will then that be easier to distract if one is not in flow and the rest is?
If the bass player or the drummer, if the drummer misses a beat, then that'll take everyone out.
Yeah, exactly. You just rip the carpet out of the entire band. Let's go back to the intrinsically rewarding. and some of these things, right? So the match, the challenge, and the skill is like, so an intense focus on the present. If you want to get in flow, just turn off your phone. Don't put it on silence, just turn it off. Remove all notification on your computer. Find some of these apps where you can just say, I don't want to get disturbed. And as soon as you feel your mind wanders, you're out of it, right? So, but intrinsically rewarding, we're going to talk about motivators. We also ended the episode about the brain a little bit on that note with saying, if the brain is so stupid and dumb and doesn't want to do anything, why does it actually do something? And motivators are kind of like, it is motivated to do things. It's motivated to climb the Maslow's pyramid of needs, but it's also driven by some of these motivators, like some of these things that motivate you from inside, right? So I have here 5 intrinsic motivators that you can use. Like, so if this is for yourself, but also for your users of what you're designing, right? So number 1 is curiosity. There's an inherited curiosity in every human being. We just need to know what happens, right? You say something interesting and your mind starts to just dig into that rabbit hole. There's a reason why Wikipedia is such a dangerous place for some of us. Someone says something and you start reading about it and you get more and more curious about the topic at hand, right? So there's this curiosity. Then there's passion. Every one of us have a passion, like something you're passionate. For me, it's design. It's my greatest passion. I have a lot of, passions. I have game design is a big passion of mine. Board games, reading good books, role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. I used a big portion of my youth just playing, not Dungeons and Dragons, but all sorts of different games, and just that was my big passion. There's a purpose, that what you do has a purpose, that it's meaningful, whatever you do. And so that is also an intrinsic motivator, that you're here to change the world, or you're here to change the state of the situation, or that there's a purpose. But then there's autonomy. I think this is a little bit, difficult to talk about, but this feeling of being me and just being in charge of the situation, right? I have autonomy, is also an autonomy. And then the last one, which is very important also for designers, is mastery, specifically game designers. Mastery means that I want to become good at what I do. And so that's a great motivator. So if you want to, like from the inside, you want to be great at playing guitar, that is a great motivator. Versus your mom and dad tells you have to be great at playing the guitar, then it becomes a little bit more of a challenge, right? And so if you can't find any of these motivators inside of you for a task that you're doing, there's other motivators. But just like, if you can't find any of these, because these are the most common ones, then you might have a problem of getting into flow. So I would recommend that you just look for some of these. It's like, can you be curious about this? Do you feel that it has a purpose? Is this a skill that I want to master? And if you can get any of these intrinsic motivators, there's a good chance that you can get into that. You can use that to get into that flow. Also, knowing your users, if they have this, understanding that everyone have curiosity, right? So you can use that. If you look at a lot of clickbait advertisement, use this motivator. They go like, you won't believe what happened next. And you have to click to see what happened next. And they just go straight into this curiosity. You will also see advertisement going into the mastery one, just saying 5 easy steps to become a great podcaster. And then you have to click on the link to get there. So they mix the mastery, the desire for mastery, and curiosity.
Could there be like, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, like negative flow? not productive. So like the example of Wikipedia, for example. So some people will just sit there focusing on that, clicking for hours. Are they in flow doing something like that that's not really giving them much end product other than, I guess, learning pointless information?
Oh, man. You asked aggressive questions today, Martin. Thank you.
Answer me.
That's a really, really good question. So because I don't think there is such a thing as negative flow. However, it was like whether that activity is negative or positive, constructive or not, it depends on the purpose of why you're doing it. It's like, and the desire, right? So sometimes you do this, it's like going into the YouTube rabbit hole, right? Sometimes that's just because your brain is tired and you're too tired to go to sleep, basically, right? So you go like, oh man, I'm tired. I could just go to sleep, but I simply can't manage that.
It's too much
too big of a task for me. But I guess like that, and that's where it becomes destructive, right? And I guess you're not in flow at that stage. But it is I think we should ask Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi about that. He would know because I don't. It's a very, very good question to ask. Because in one, it's like flow is a positive experience. It's where everything is positive, but that browsing around without using your brain is, I would say no. You can't have a negative. It's something else. It's your brain just cutting off. Because you don't feel that. After that session like that, you don't feel great. It feels horrible. All right, let's go to the last point, skill versus difficulty. I guess that's point 5, and I wanted to kind of covered it a little bit in the prerequisites for flow, where we say match the challenge and the skill. I just want to go one step further in that. Why is it a perfect learning situation? And so that moment where you're in, or where you want to create that condition for flow in a game, for example, or in a teaching situation. If your skill is matched by the challenge, that's great. But if you push it so that the challenge is just slightly greater than your skill, so it becomes difficult, but not too difficult. I can't remember his name, but there's this guy who says it has to be 4% harder than your skill level is, allows you to just do it automatically. But I think it's like the reason, I don't know what 4% mean specifically, but it shows something about how little it has to be. It's like it has to be right on the edge and then just a little bit. And it ties into this, if just 4% harder, your skill increases consistently, right? And so you have to increase the difficulty. You see this a lot in games, right? The difficulty increases rather fast on games, right? And then there's other activities which requires more practice, like playing the guitar. And the great thing about the guitar is that no matter how good you are, you can always be better. But you set the pace automatically. It's at your level where you are, and then you just push it on a little bit further. Climbing a rock wall is the same thing. I love this thing when you climb bouldering. I don't know if you tried bouldering, but you will have this wall and you will have all of these knobs on it, and you can use them to climb. And if you look at some of these walls, they have different color codes, right? So the different knobs, I don't know what they're called. In Danish, it's called greb. It's like the ones that you grab onto.
Yeah, let's call them knobs. That'll do.
Let's call them knobs. Knobs. You hang on to them, and they have different color codes. And then when you're bouldering, you can design your own path based on what knobs you kind of use to climb, right? And so you say, all right, I'm going to take the red route, and then you only take the red one. So all of the time you are in this mode where you want to challenge yourself just a little bit more. You can say it's like you're pushing yourself to the maximum of your automatic part, and then a little bit further, right? You want to stretch that challenge, but not snap it, right? You don't want to go overboard where despair kicks in and it's like, I can't do this, it's too difficult, right? So you want to hit that sweet spot where it's just difficult enough for people not to be frustrated, because then they go out of flow and then the whole experience is destroyed. And I guess that's it, actually. For me, what I wanted in this episode is just touch upon the basics of flow and why it's important as a designer. And I hope this gave you a little bit of insight in some of the things.
But throughout that episode, I was thinking of times where I've said, oh, today's gone really quickly. And I think that is, or if I sit down to do a bulk of work and the morning just flies by, that would suggest that I've been in flow. And yeah, I like that. And also because sometimes you look back and think, oh, that day went really quickly. What a bad thing, because the day's gone quick. But now hopefully that will switch my brain the other way. If it's gone quick, it means I've been in flow, productive.
You've been productive, you learned a lot, probably, and you should be in a better mood.
What's next?
The next topic will be episode 6, and it's going to be about noise and biases.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Well, I guess now we should say thank you for listening. We'll get better at this over time, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.